My name is Juliana Nicolasian with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, August 21st, 2007, and I am in Lewisville, Texas, interviewing Dr. Valerie Fletcher Wynn. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Dr. Wynn was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1996. She was the first African American to earn both her master's and PhD in English from Oklahoma State University. Dr. Wynn's career in education has been filled with many firsts, and she has received numerous honors over the years. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Wynn.
Thank you.
Well, let's begin today by learning more about you. Could you start with where you grew up and give a little background on your early life?
Well, I grew up in southwestern Oklahoma. And I say southwestern because there's a totally different atmosphere there than there is in northeastern Oklahoma, where Oklahoma State is located. My father was a sharecropper, and we farmed about 450 acres of land. But the area in which we lived, there was no black school. And the first attempt we made at my going to school, Mother and Daddy found a nice family in Hobart, Oklahoma, which is about 12 or 15 miles from Sentinel. And I was to stay there and go to school. And the interesting thing is that I could read before I started to school. The first day I went to school in Hobart, the lady asked me to read in a book. She didn't know what grade to put me in. She said, "I'll just keep reading, and the first time you miss a word, that's the grade I put you in." First time I missed a grade or word, I was in the third grade reader, so I started out in the third grade. Well, Mother and Daddy were so devoted to me, they couldn't stand to be away from me, so that didn't last for about 2 months, and they decided I need to come home. And so my father went to the county seat at Cordell and got a permission thing. He had to get so many people to sign it to build a school for blacks in that near area, because there were about 20 or 25 black children there that no school to go to. And we were successful in getting a one-room school, and the family whose land we farmed donated the acre of ground to put it on, and they built it, and it was very, very nice. But the majority of the blacks who were there lived in an area about 1.25 miles, which was right outside of the town of Sentinel. And they resented the fact that their children had to walk down to, see, the school was on our property. They had to walk down to the school. We went to school in that building a year, and somebody burned it to the ground. And that left us with no place to have school. And my father and some of his friends built a brush arbor, because we started early and we'd have to turn out for what they call cotton picking. And so we went to school under this brush arbor in that part of the summer. And when winter came, we had to make some adjustments. So we took one room of our house, the house we lived in, and moved all the little benches in there, and we had school in the house. But the difficult thing is that the teacher stayed with us, and I had to be a perfect angel, because Mother, Mother knew everything that was going on in school. Whether I was naughty or whether I was nice, Mother always knew. But one thing that made that section of the country as segregated as it was, and as the atmosphere was very, very, it was just, segregation was just so obvious in that area. But we lived, the family whose land we owned were from Kansas, and they were some of the most delightful people that I've ever met. And there were several members of them that were scattered out over the community, and their great-granddaughter was my best friend. So now you can't improve on that out of a situation. Here is this island of acceptance and love, and we visited back and forth, and my father and her father played dominoes. The two mothers sewed, and we played. it was delightful. And when we went to the movies, she went upstairs and sat in the balcony with me. And I asked her all the time, I said, do they ever tease you about this? And she said, it doesn't matter, you know. But it made for a very, very pleasant situation. In the middle, there's an oasis in all of this ocean of segregation.
When you went to that, when they said you were going to be in the 3rd grade, how old were you? Do you remember?
I was either 7 or 8.
And that one-room schoolhouse that was built, did it have a name?
Funny you should ask that. Vernon. I didn't put it on this list, but when I was making up the schools I attended, I didn't put Vernon on there. Yeah, it had a name. And the last time my mother and I visited in that county, there was only one black in the county, and he was a very, very old man, so there are probably no blacks in Washita County now. Sentinel was in Washita County.
Okay. Would you like to talk about any of the other schools you attended growing up, or?
Well, when I finished the 8th grade there at Vernon, the teacher was from Lawton, who incidentally, she's one of the best teachers I've ever known. She was, I think in my lifetime I've seen 4 master teachers. And I'll get to that further on down about the attitude you should have if you're going to get into the profession. You need to be of a rare breed. They don't come along, but every generation or so. So I went to Lawton and lived with her parents and attended high school. And you know, I often thought about that, having to go away from home to attend school, which means I think about all the chores that I did at home, and I was raised as an only child. All the steps that mother had to take that I could have taken if I'd been there, but no, I had to be in Lawton because, and here I'm passing a high school to get to a high school. It really, segregation doesn't make sense. And see, Lawton is about 80 miles from Sentinel. And the back and the forth and the back and the forth thing. It just, but it turned out well, and I finished high school. And then I went, mother had a brother that lived, 2 brothers that lived in Pueblo, Colorado. And we went out there to visit them, mother and I, one summer. And mother just talking about, you know, pretty soon I'd be ready for college and all that. So my uncles that we were visiting said, you know what, we've got a junior college here. Why don't you let her come and stay with us and she can go to junior college? And so, well, we decided that would be a good thing to do. But I should have gotten a degree in walking because it was quicker to walk where the college was than it was to ride the streetcars. You go down almost to the town, you wait on another streetcar, you go down, and they deposit you about 4 or 5 blocks from the school. And so you end up walking almost as much as if you had started out. But it was my first time in an integrated school. And that's what made the difference. I just could not believe that there were white people who would accept you and who would be friends with you and who, you know, would know and sign your yearbook and, you know, the back and forth and run over and get a hamburger with you. It was a totally new experience for me. And I left there and I came back to Langston. Well, Pueblo Junior College, you know, Colorado is known for its good schools. And they had stuffed so much information with me by the time I got to Langston. I would meet with a class and they would have a discussion and one class, the teacher told me, you're exempt from this class because you probably had all of this. I got a fabulous background in English. I got a fabulous background in study habits. That's something that I really needed in Pueblo Junior College. So I left there and I came to Langston and I just kind of goofed around. I really did.
What was Langston like in the 40s? I mean, what was driving by now on the highway, you know, you see lots of buildings. Were there lots of buildings on campus?
No.
Or?
No, it was. When I went on the Board of Regents, I saw a list of appropriations for various schools when I first went on, and the total budget for Langston was laughable. And I remember that the salary they paid the groundskeepers was not enough to pay one person, and no one person could take care of that huge camp, not that huge, but it would be a monumental job for one person. So most of it was just laughable. It was just ridiculous. That same way at Douglas, the equipment that we got was the equipment that Lawton High had used and no longer needed when they got new equipment. The band uniforms and the football uniforms and the books were totally, just almost unusable. Some had pages to run out of them and stains on the uniforms. But at that time, if you've never had anything else, then you think, well, this is, all right. But if I've had a new uniform and I have to put on a used uniform, then I'll protest. So we never had anything else, so we thought, well, that's where you're supposed to. You're supposed to wear these worn-out uniforms and this stained football equipment, So it's just a matter of time, But when I got to OSU, that too was a new experience. Because whether you know it or not, there was a time when blacks could not walk across the campus at OSU. But the atmosphere at OSU, I thought, was so much better than I had a son and a daughter to go to OU. And when I came to OSU as a graduate student, they just welcomed me with open arms. And I was kind of they found me so interesting because I was the first full-time graduate student in that program. They had just written the program. They had just written the PhD program when I went out there. And so everybody had an interest in me. I remember being out there one time, and I was in the hall waiting for somebody, and this kid came by that was assistant janitor, and he said, well, how do you like our program? I said, well, I think it's pretty nice. Well, I heard you were out here, and I just wondered how it was going. And when I came out from my orals from the masters, somebody was out there waiting on me. And what was it like? They, not just the faculty and just the student, but even the people that swept the building knew that I was there. And every eye was on me. But it was I had a delightful advisor both times. And down here where it says something about meeting someone that changed your whole life, when I went back for the doctorate and met John Milstead. That was the best thing that ever happened in my academic career, was meeting him. He told me, he said, I'll take you as a student and I'll make a scholar out of you. Now, he almost broke my neck doing it. I had to make the transition to get by. Oh my goodness. And he showed me what a potential you had to develop to move from a fact-bound student to a thinking scholar. Some teachers lecture and you copy their notes, and they tell me that in these fraternity houses on big campuses, they have files on certain teachers. When you came out of Milstead class, maybe you'd have 4 or 5 pages of notes after a semester. But you were a totally changed person, and you should see the syllabus he gave you at the beginning. And the first time I looked at it, I said, But by this time I got out of that course, that syllabus was dog-eared, and a few tears on it, and coffee stains, and I'm telling you, but it was a wonderful experience. It was wonderful.
What did he teach?
Well, I had 9 hours under him. He taught modern drama one year. He taught Shakespeare. He taught romantic poetry. And something else I don't remember. But he was the kind of person, he allowed you to think for yourself. But if you couldn't defend the point of view that you took, he would nail you to the wall. And rather than risk that kind of embarrassment, you would go through that syllabus, and just about every book you pull out of the library had his name on the slip. At OSU, the names went on the slip. And the tragic part of it, he was losing his eyesight at the time. But he made you use what gray matter you had up there and borrow some that you needed and didn't have. And what he did for me was so useful in preparing that dissertation. He was my dissertation advisor too. And there was another teacher out there whose name I don't dare mention, taught just the opposite way. He wanted the facts, he wanted the lecture, he wanted the facts, and he didn't move you any. You came out with a lot of facts, but you didn't come out knowing how to defend an opinion and knowing how to think critically and knowing how to inspire others to light the flame of knowledge, And I think it paid off because I had one student. I can't think of her last name. Her first name was Veronica. Came and asked me a question one day about the lesson, and I explained it to her, and she sat there and she kind of tapped her head on the edge, and she thought. She said, "Dr. Wynn, do you know what? I see how it all fits together." She said, "You have taught me how to learn." And that's what Milstead did for me. He taught me how to learn. And the fact that I was able to pass this on to another student made all the aggravations and irritations of teaching worthwhile.
Now, was Veronica at Cameron?
Yes.
Okay.
You have taught me how to learn. I'll never forget her.
Okay. Well, let's jump back for a second, back
Okay.
to your youth. When you were younger, what were some of your favorite subjects in school? Was it always English?
No, but I liked reading. Any course that I had reading in. I even found geography kind of interesting. Didn't like math because I was never convinced that math was for girls. Had too much thinking in there. And you see, in math, you're so fenced in. 2 and 2 is 4, and that's that. But you see, in language and literature and reading, you can travel the world. Emily Dickinson had a little poem. I always think the cover of a book is like a door which opens into someone's house that I've not been before. A pirate or fairy queen may lift the latch for me. I always wonder when I knock what welcome it will be. And see, I wanted to go beyond that. You could just traverse the whole existence. The planets, and there is no limit to where you can go if you read. And I started out with Zane Grey. I read everything Zane Grey had. And the reason I did is that back to the couple that owned the land we lived on, they had a Zane Grey library. And they let me enjoy it. And then when I went to Lawton to live, I was about 3 blocks go up here and there, and about 4 blocks from the library. And I kept a list of all the books. I read 100 and something books while I was in high school, in addition to my schoolwork. Reading just fascinated me. And when I went back to graduate school to work on a PhD in English, I don't pick up a book unless I just have to. They read me to death, really. It was, I do very little reading for pleasure now. I get, there was a book up there that a lady gave me, one of these, dime novels, and I took it. These over behind something up there because it just didn't capture my fancy. And a delightful experience I've had. My daughter-in-law that lives in North Carolina suggested to me that I share with her some of the great works, and I gave her a list, and she read through that list and got the biggest kick out of it. And we can share these books now and
What are some of the books on that list?
Well, let's see. There was Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and there was Vanity Fair, and there was The Vicar of Wakefield, and I didn't pull any of. When I studied English novel, we studied it in sequence of development, and it gets kind of boggy off down in there because there's one book in there, Tristram Shandy, where the hero of the book is not born until halfway through the book. And there's a chapter in there on noses and a chapter in there on aprons. But you see, it tells us that this is the way literature is moving. See, literature has moved from an object out there for reality. The whole idea of reality is located in something outside the mind, into the mind. And the fellow that wrote Tristram Shandy saw this. That's why Virginia Woolf and I'm losing my memory. Ulysses, James Joyce's Ulysses. Inside the mind will you find reality. And it's so difficult to transfer from objective reality to subjective reality. And that was pretty much the idea of my dissertation, that a work can be best understood if you recognize these two realities, objective and subjective. But most of what you read nowadays, it's back to the objective reality. Because to go inward it's just difficult. It doesn't make sense because the mind doesn't flow in a natural, ordered pattern. You have to impose a pattern on your thinking. And without that pattern, that's what Joyce did. All of the thoughts of that, I think his name was Leopold Bloom, in one day, in 24 hours, that's what he attempted to capture in that book. And it's fragments and something else he'd fall off in the middle of a sentence and, never finish it and go here and go there, and that's the way the mind travels. And you can see what a difficult experience it would be for someone who, outside the field of English, I don't think that kind of fiction appeals to many people, nor do they recognize. And see, that's what Dr. Milstead taught me in romantic poetry. That's the direction they were going. They were internal reality. And this other person that I told you about who lectured did not recognize, refused to admit that this change was taking place in English literature, and gave me on my dissertation. My advisor was off campus. They borrowed him at another university for a semester, and I had to go, when I took my orals, I had to go under this other person, and he was telling me in a nice way what he thought about my dissertation. It could all be summed up in a few sentences. Oh, I said, Dr. So-and-so, at least spare me a paragraph, maybe a page. I worked on that thing 2 years, and he was dismissing it, which let me know that he did not understand modern literature. He wouldn't come any further down. He admitted Melville and what other writer in the modern era, but and that was why, because he didn't understand what had happened. So one can be so learned in one area and so limited in another. I learned that in graduate school too. Okay.
All right. Well, outside of reading and embracing literature when you were younger, what else did you like to do for fun?
Cut out pictures of movie stars and make scrapbooks with them, and sew. Santa Claus brought me a little sewing machine. We have shifted around so much I've lost most of my belongings, but I still have that little sewing machine. And you clamp it on a desk and roll the little handle, and it made a little chain stitch. And my mother gave me a great big piece of material, and I made my doll 12 outfits out of that material. Oh, I got the biggest kick out of it. Mother was determined that I would be a home economics major, but I didn't like to cook, and I just refused to learn how to cook. It just didn't capture my fancy. And but the thing that I was good at was reading, and English offered me that opportunity, so I was an English major. And I have an article in there that I took out of a magazine, What Does One Do with an English Major? But I always remind them that Barry Switzer, former coach at Oklahoma University, was an undergraduate English major.
And now look at him.
Yeah.
He's not teaching. Sometimes coaching is teaching.
Yeah, sometimes.
Now, when you're younger, you're this little girl. You moved from Texas to Oklahoma. You know, as you're running around and reading and sewing, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Oh, a teacher. I always knew that.
No question?
No. Nope. I always wanted to be a teacher. I just thought there was some. Well, and this is something else that might figure in. There were no other opportunities available. That's the only profession that I knew anything about. The people who were engaged professionally that I knew were beauty shop operators for women, either preaching or funeral home for men, and as teaching, that's about the size of it. So there's the only one I was familiar with, and it was good that it coincided with my desire to be a teacher.
Can you tell me some of your role models, who you looked up to during that time when you were younger?
Well, there was one teacher in particular. Her name was Reba Cheney. To me, she exemplified the qualities that I thought, not just a teacher, but a person. She was a teacher by profession, as I said, the very last do. But she was also so very, admirable and so very, she had such a wonderful personality. She just reached for the whole person in you. You know, she didn't just see that you could spell cat, but she saw what you were down inside and encouraged that. She was always in my corner. She passed away about 12, 15 years ago. But the last time I talked with her, she always, I came out just, she always she brought me up, make me feel like I was really somebody. And my mother, I was fortunate to have had one of the most remarkable people that God ever created for a mother, who saw in me something that needed to be cultivated, and who made every effort to cultivate that something. My mother and father divorced when I was 17, just when I'd finished high school and getting ready to go to college. That's why that trip to Pueblo paid off so much, because that opportunity would not have arisen if we hadn't gone out there. In fact, I did a paper on from ABC to PhD talking about but it was a spiritual journey, because when I got older and looked back at it, I said, somebody up there likes me. Looks like every time a door would close over here, one would open over there. And I became aware of that. Oh, I was in midlife before it came to me one day. I couldn't have done all that if I hadn't had some kind of spiritual guidance, or some kind of creator touching my life. But I think about my religion, my social training, everything came from my mother. My motivation toward learning, because when I was a senior in college, I decided I had gone to school enough, and I'd gone to school all my life, and I wasn't going to go back to school that semester. And we were living in Wichita, Kansas, then the war had broken out. My mother was working for Boeing Aircraft. And I proudly announced to Mother, Mother, I don't think I'll go back to school this year. I think I've had enough school, and I'm going to do this and so and therefore. And Mother had a very unique way of raising one eyebrow, and she raised that one eyebrow and looked at me. And she didn't comment. When we got ready to go to bed, she said, what time does the bus leave in the morning? I said 9:30, and I was on the bus, and that was the end of that. But Mother always seemed to know that I was, I had possibilities. She knew before I did, and she just set my course in that direction. Every step of the way, she was right there. And it was such a wonderful thing. And she passed this on to my son. My older son thinks there was nobody in the world like his grandmother. He said she was an entrepreneur in the days when nobody even knew what the word meant. And he was the apple of her eye. He could do no wrong. And every summer he would go out, and she was living in Clovis, New Mexico, and stay 3 or 4 or 5 weeks with her, and I'd go out there and pick him up and come back. And she told me, and I got on to him one day out there, and she called me and said, I wish you wouldn't spank him. Said the doctor said that I had a weak heart, and it might upset me. So she had a little storage house in the back. I said, you think you can hear him from the storage house? Because that's where I'm fixing to take him and spank him. She loved that child, and he loved her. I think that was the single greatest influence on his life. It surpassed. He gives me a lot of credit, but I think from his grandmother, he benefited greatly.
Now, Reba Cheney, what grade did she teach you? And where was this at?
She was in Lawton Douglas, and she taught home economics in high school. And at that time, we did what we called roomed with one another. She roomed with the same family that I roomed with. So I got to see her, the whole year. She was from Oklahoma City, but she taught in Lawton most of her time.
Now, you spoke a lot about your mother. Tell me about the rest of your family. Are you an only child? Tell me about your husband and your children.
Well, now, most of that is a subject that I don't care to go into because I was adopted.
Okay.
And it accounts for, when I'm speaking of one thing, I may have said something and you wonder, well, how do those two things come together? It's because I had a life other than my adopted life. But it's the best thing that ever happened to me because I know my real mother, but she had no interest at all in education. And I visited her all the way up until her death after Mother died. And the person that I call Mother was my adopted mother. The mother who gave birth to me was the sister to her, and she lived in Los Angeles. But my family, my husband was working Shepherd Air Force Base. They did training materials for aircraft and A&E, I don't know what A&E something, or it's the largest aircraft training school that there is. And they did the training manuals. And it was so interesting because every time they would get through with a manual, it was obsolete. That's how fast progress has moved, from that. And so he ended up in Lawton. They created a job of equal employment opportunity officer, and that's where he transferred to. But he lived only 7 years after he took this job, and I sometimes wonder about the coincidence of the 7 years, because he made such. My husband was a natural born leader. Whatever he was in, he ended up being the president of. And my son is the same way, or in charge or whatever, And as equal employment opportunity officer, he was able to oversee hiring and firing practices among minorities, not just blacks, but all minorities on the base. And he liked it, but he always said it was a 24/7 job because they thought nothing of coming to the house. Now, Mr. Wynn, I tell you, over there where I work, they're doing this and that and there for you. He was a father confessor to all the people who were unhappily employed. And, of course, my son, he finished Oklahoma University, and he went to ROTC, and he was commissioned the same day he graduated. And he served 7 years in the United States Army. And he came out during the time he was stationed at Fort Bragg, which again, as I say, watch how things develop at Fort Bragg. And he drive back and forth to Raleigh. And he was an undergraduate psychology major, drive back and forth to Raleigh and work on his master's in community college administration. And so when they decided to institute a terminal degree in community college administration at North Carolina State, that's where he went, North Carolina State, because they have 52 community colleges in the state of North Carolina. So they said, well, now we've got to have somebody to train these people to go in and be presidents of these colleges. So he was fortunate enough to get on at Durham Tech, and that's where he did his training. And when they advertised for president, they had 108 applications, and he was chosen. That lets you know. See, I don't believe all these things are coincidences. I believe they're ordered by a power higher than we are. And so, I think he did a pretty good job there, because when he decided to retire, you should have heard the kudos and that, this and that. And they have a new building on campus, and they named it for him. And now my daughter passed away in 1983. She was a graduate at Oklahoma University, and she worked for Southwestern Bell. And my younger son, Michael David, my daughter was Patricia, Michael David is here. And he's married to a very wonderful woman. So is Phil, I just think the world and all. And they have been married 34 years. And that's the last time the family was together at the wedding. and they had the most beautiful wedding you ever did see. And I'd always dreamed of this wedding with the stained glass windows and the sun coming through, these beautiful colors on the floor. It was just the most perfect thing that ever happened. And Mike is married to a lovely girl. He hadn't been married as long as. I said, Mike, how long have you and Cheryl been married? I don't know. She won't tell me. So, but I was at that wedding. She won't tell me. Mike is artistic, and he's creative. Now, he's a child who would appreciate Shakespeare, and we could discuss it, but I have a grandson who is in Iraq now, and it's breaking my heart. That's my older son's only child. And when he was in about the 9th grade, they read Macbeth. He had to do a paper on Macbeth, and he was asking his father his opinion about something. He said, why don't you call your grandmother? Said, she knows all about Shakespeare. And he called me, and he explained to me what, and I told him, I said, now, this is the way it's. And when I got through with my long explanation, he said, no, Granny, it wasn't like that. He said, now, see, he did this because of that, and he did, and everything, observation he made, he had a reason for making it. Now, what do you do with it? He is my pride and joy, though. And he's never been a child. He was born an adult. He just had to wait and, grow up, because he and I have been having adult conversations ever since he was about 4 or 5 years old. We talk one adult to another. And my daughter was a person, I don't think she ever met a person that she didn't like, that didn't like her. She didn't meet strangers. She was one of the most delightful people I've ever known. And she was my best friend. But I'm always grateful for the fact she died when she was 29, that I got to enjoy her for 29 years. I'm grateful for that fact. And let's see now. Oh, and I said I have the 2 best daughters-in-law in the world. And when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, they flew in to take me to Oklahoma City for the presentation. They flew in North Carolina. And I made a little talk in accepting the honor, and I told him, I said, now that couple right there at the table, Dr. and Mrs. Fayda Wynn Jr., they are the wind beneath my wings. And I looked up, and great big tears were going down Peggy's cheeks. Mike's tender-hearted like that. When he got married, he was married by justice of the peace, and great big tears started rolling down his very, very sensitive child. They are the wind beneath my wings.
It sounds like family has been very important in
Oh,
your
yes.
life through the years.
They really have.
We talked a little bit about your time in college as a student.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reflections, anything else you'd like to mention about your times, either at Langston or Oklahoma State, that you would like to bring up at this time?
Well, let's see, Langston or Oklahoma State. My time at Langston was kind of interesting. I was just there 2 years, And I finished in 1943, which means I came to Langston in 1941. And you know what else happened in that time? The war broke out, and all the boys left the campus, and that's when I learned to play bridge, because we didn't have anything else to do, so we learned to play bridge. That just completely devastated our campus.
No boys.
No boys.
Oh, that's rough.
The ones that were left, you didn't want them, because if they had been up to par, they would have gone in the army with the able-bodied ones. So, but I loved college life. I loved living in a dorm, being an only child out on that farm, and all of a sudden I have friends next door, across the hall, down the hall. You're just surrounded. Oh, that was probably, I thought, the best atmosphere you could wish for. Dorm life that's wonderful.
And you lived on campus at Langston?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the name of your dorm?
Sanford Hall, named after one of the presidents, J.W. Sanford. Sanford Hall. Langston's campus is so different now than it was then, because they didn't have the wherewithal to bring it up to standard. And you can't talk about that. If you scratch the surface, somebody's going to be hurt by it, because the unique thing about that, everybody that went to college went to Langston, which means that you knew everybody, because we were at Langston together. That was the only school that blacks could attend, so everybody went to Langston. And that's where I met my husband, of course, at Langston.
Where did you meet him? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to share?
When we would eat dinner, and part of Sanford Hall was the dining hall. Part of it was where you entertained friends out there. And there was a fellow from Lawton that I'd gone to school with, and he was out there in Langston. And he came over to me and said, "Do you have any money?" I said, "Yes, I keep money." He said, "Well, would you let me have, I think, 11 cents for a sandwich over in the little sandwich bar across the way there?" And I said, "I don't know whether I can trust you with my money or not." He said, "Oh, I'll bring it back to you." I said, "I don't know." And he had on this beautiful coat. He came from a very good family in Lawton. And he said, "I'll let you keep my coat." I said, "I've got a quarter, and I want you to go there and get change for it and let you have 11 cents. He said, "You can hold my coat for security." I said, "Now you don't get your coat back till I get my quarter back." And while I was standing there waiting on him to go and change the quarter, my husband came up and started a conversation with me about this coat. "Well, look at the good-looking coat you have there." And I never knew it would lead to marriage, because well, first of all, marriage wasn't on my mind then, and secondly, I didn't see anybody out there I wanted to.
And he didn't go off to the war?
We'd been going together about 3 months when his time came up.
Okay.
And when he'd come home on furlough, instead of going home, he'd come to the campus, stay out in the village so we could hold hands and grin at one another.
What branch of the service was he in?
Army.
Army.
He was in the Army. My son was my husband was in the Air Force. My son was in the Army, and the other son was in the Navy. I said,
And your
and
grandson?
was in the Marines.
Oh, wow. You have all
We've
the
touched all. And it wasn't planned. We were just look at this. And we've been, every branch of the service has had a win in it. I said, yeah, it'll never be the same.
Well, you're a teacher, you're an educator, and you went to Langston and you went to Oklahoma State for your master's and PhD. Now, sometimes we learn the background we need for our careers in different places. Tell me about some of the most important places where you learned the background for your career.
Well, would you believe that the background and the backbone that I needed for my career was taught to me by a 4th grade student? I started to teach in the middle of a semester. And at Douglas, they had these 3 classes, 4th, 5th, and 6th, under 2 teachers. And the teachers had to travel from room to room, back and forth. And they were so glad to get me to cover that extra room, because I'm just starting out. And this little boy taught me all I needed to know about handling students. We were singing one morning, it was in 4th grade. we had what they called a devotion every morning. And when we got to the end of that song, I said, Marshall, why aren't you singing? I don't feel like singing this morning. So I told us, we'll just go ahead and let's finish the song. We finished the song. And that evening, we got ready to go home. I dismissed them one by one. And Marshall looked around. There was nobody left there but him. He said, Miss Wynn, can I go home now? I said, no. So he sat there, can I go home now? I said, no. So the third time he said, are you going to let me go home? I said, yes, when you sing all 3 verses of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. That was the song we were singing that morning. And we were there till about 6 o'clock before he finally got through that song. But I learned from that, either you get them or they'll get you. And I had a reputation as a disciplinarian in Douglas because what I learned from Marshall, but not with Marshall, I used it in all my classes, and it worked. I know one that said he didn't have enough time off. They ought to give us more time off. He said, I could use another recess. And we used up that one recess we had, so he said, I think I need 30 minutes during the day to do what I'm going to do. So when we got ready to go to lunch, I said, Bobby Joe, bring your chair here. I pushed this chair out in the hall. I said, we'll be gone for 30 minutes. That can be your 30 minutes that you don't have to be in the classroom. See, he wasn't in the classroom, he was out in the hall. But he was out there by himself in that chair, and that was his 30 minutes. So I never had any more problem about him.
Now that we're talking about your time as a teacher, as an educator, could you just run down the places where you've taught for us?
Oh, that's easy. I've only taught at Douglas,
Okay.
and Lawton High, and Cameron.
Okay. All right. And how did you end up teaching in Oklahoma?
When I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, the superintendent came down one day and in a class, and I was doing something in that class, and he told the teacher, said, see that she finishes college, and I'm going to hire her here at Douglas. So when I got out of college, I took the civil service exam and went to the Pentagon, and I knew that was not for me. Oh my goodness, that was a nightmare. And sure enough, they wired me that February that this job was open in Lawton. And I came back, and that's how I happened to start in the middle of the term. And that's where I said, I'm Texas born and Okie bred, and when I die, I'll be Okie dead. I love Oklahoma.
And how did you feel returning to the place where you went to Douglas, right?
Yes.
How did it feel returning there as a teacher?
Oh, I thought I was doing something big. There's nothing like that first teaching experience when you go there and your name is above that door and you have made it at Douglas and you have succeeded at Douglas. And you see, Douglas to us was more than a school job. It was kind of a way of life. They still have a reunion every other year, and they will cross the ocean to get to it, Douglas students. That's what kind of hold that environment had on us. We belonged. See, that sense of belonging is what's necessary. And that's what we've lost in integration. Because when students used to come back to visit relatives in Lawton, they would come to the school sometime before they'd go home to their friends and neighbors. They knew they were well loved, and they felt that love and that sense of belonging, and there was just something about Douglas that made you feel like I'm home and I'm with family. And we had an atmosphere that I don't think can ever be duplicated. I had one parent would send the medicine over there to give to her little girl. She won't take it from me, but she'll take it for you. That's the kind of things that we had to do. And our school day didn't end at 4 o'clock when the bell rang. Sometimes it'd be 8 or 9 o'clock at night when we got home. Because we had a job to do. We had to not only teach the child, we had to nourish the child. We had to, well, as I said, it takes a village. And the community where Douglas was located was that village to raise that child. And the kids seemed to know it, and that's why they would always return. They would return to the scene of the crime. They were coming back because they were they felt that love.
Now, how did you go from Douglas to Cameron University? If you could just take us through that.
Well, as I said, Mr. Swinney, B.C. Swinney, was superintendent, and he told me that if I finished college, he would hire me at Douglas. So when they sent me a telegram at the, in Washington, I opted to come back to Lawton. The pace up there, the pace, you just was run everywhere, and you slept in a hurry, and you ate in a hurry, and you caught streetcars in a hurry, the traffic and everything. I'm to get out of that congestion, so I came back to nice, quiet Lawton and started there. And I was away for a while because when my husband came out of the service, where we moved away, and he was of the opinion that neither of us had enough education to compete favorably in the workforce. He said, if I move from my job or anything happens to me, you have to go to work. He said, a bachelor's is not going to be enough. Well, I highly disagreed with him, but his brother had to push me up on the bus to go to Stillwater to start working on my master's. And incidentally, we were strapped for cash. I finished my master's in a year. In 9 months, I finished the master's. And when I came back, I didn't go to work. I was a stay-at-home mom for a while. And then finally, they pressured me to come back. We were living in Wichita Falls, to come back to Lawton to teach. And I was driving back and forth on weekends, and run school. In teaching. And so in 1960, I came back to Lawton for good, for personal reasons, and went to work at Douglas. And about 1965, they closed Douglas. They were in the process of closing Douglas. And that's when they moved me to Lawton High. Well, they didn't say, Valerie, do you want to go to Lawton High? They said, next year you will teach at Lawton High. And Lawton High was not ready for integration. Definitely not. But the fortunate thing was, and it always happens that way, I had the most remarkable principal. He and his wife, I don't think his first name was Gene. I can't think of his last name. But they really were the wind beneath my wings in my going to Lawton High. And when I first got there, he'd come down every weekend, every Friday, to see how I was doing. And he told me that after I moved to Cameron, we were talking, he said some of the parents had called and one of their kids moved out of my class. And he said, well, why don't you let them stay in there for a while and see, if we could all make adjustments to one another. And he said most of those parents were reasonable enough to come to him at the end of the semester and said, it's the best thing I ever did, to leave my child in her class. So I guess I had made it, but I had a good time doing it because I didn't really have a discipline problem, because when I walk in the classroom, they would sit there and stare at me. I don't think they'd ever seen a black up close before.
And this is at Lawton High?
At Lawton High, yes. And that's hard to believe now. The atmosphere at Lawton High now, the last time I went up there, when you can get me up there, because when I go up there, I remember that miserable year I spent. Well, 1960, that's how I got to Lawton High. We need a black at Lawton High. Val has there's an opening in English. Val has a master's in English. Let's send her up there. Okay. All right. And then Cameron, this friend of mine was playing golf with the president out on at the Lawton Golf Club. And said he paused in the middle and said, look, Albert, we're going to have a black at Cameron. Who would you recommend? Well, what department? Well, an English department we put in there. Well, there's Val Wynn. She's got a master's in English. Well, have her come over and talk to me. Okay. I was at Cameron 6 or 8 months before I filled out an application. And, that had kind of an effect on me because it would surface in my mind, I'm only here because I'm black, not because I can do the job. I knew I could do the job, but I don't think they knew or cared as long as, you were black. And I tell them, keep me happy because if I leave, you won't find anybody else here. So you better be nice to me. So that's how I got to Cameron. But that's what I had always wanted to do, was teach in a university. So when Cameron went 4 years, became a 4-year school, see, Cameron was 2 years, and I went out there. They decided we needed to go back and add some more hours to our credentials. Go back and get 21 hours. So the first time I went back in 1970, I got my 21 hours. Well, I was through. I lost weight at OSU studying so hard. But 2 things happened. First of all, it proved that I was not too old to learn, because the first test I had in the worst class out there, the one that everybody in every department talks about, I made the highest grade. And he came over and stood in front of me and said, Madam, you made the highest grade in the class. And I didn't know him well enough to tell him what I wanted to tell him. And there were students who, it was hard to find a job in those years because the profession was pretty crowded. And they were going all the way through from to bachelor's to master's to PhD. And there were 16 of us in this class, and by my making the highest grade in that class, that means that I still had 2 or 3 sparks burning up in this old brain.
Which class was that?
Something called Introduction to Graduate Studies. It's a fabled class on the campus. Oh my goodness.
And how old were you when you went back for your PhD?
46, I think.
Wow.
See, all that figured, all factored in. And I look around and kids, I can't compete with these kids. They came straight through, I don't know what and my husband told me this, and it worked. Dr. Berkeley was the chairman of the graduate studies class. And he was the one that they cried, and they carried on over, and one girl had to come back from France to take the test over at the end because, oh Lord. Well, I never did figure out why I had to take Introduction to Graduate Studies in the first place, because I had a master's from OSU. To me, that was a stupid class. I worked harder for that class than I ever worked for any class in my life. But when I would complain, my husband would say, now, do one thing. Evidently, Berkeley is the bear, he said. Ace the bear, and you got it made. So, as luck would have it, I aced the bear. And I was home free. I have nothing but A's on my graduate transcript.
That's good. Now, you taught at Cameron University for how long?
19 years.
19 years. And just tell me a little bit about your experience at Cameron. Do you have any fond memories you'd like to share with us?
Well, I worked with some wonderful people. And fond memories. when I decided to move to Louisville, one of the retired faculty gave a dinner for me, and she was my department head for a while, and then I taught out there. And I thought it was so, to me, that showed the kind of atmosphere that I had at Cameron, that she thought enough of me to, she gave the big dinner for me. You know, and when we had all this rain, she called down here to see, Val, are you all right down there? Yes, I'm fine. I made friends, and they were not just friends for the day while we were at work. They were friends outside. And you see, that's what happened in a lot of cases. You might work with them, and they'll be friendly with you, and you see a person on the street, and they would look at you as though you were a total stranger. It didn't last outside that little circle that you worked in. We'll be nice to you while we're working with you, but after hours we don't socialize together. And so several of them were friends of mine on and off campus, and I cherish a lot of the students. I have memorabilia that students have sent to me, and given me letters they've written to me and telling me how much they enjoyed what we were doing. And I remember in 1981, a relative died in Los Angeles, and I felt that I needed to go to the funeral, and I was teaching summer school. So my daughter and I went to Los Angeles, and the funeral, when I came back, I went to class that next day, and they came up and handed me 2 tapes. This is what they did. They met twice while I was gone. And another one said, you know what, I don't mind going to class, but when you have to run all the way across the campus to get a seat, he said, now I kind of mind, especially in the summertime. They went right on with what they were doing. I laid the work out at the beginning of the semester. They knew exactly what was to be done. If I were 2 or 3 minutes late, sometimes, the teacher might be 2 or 3 minutes late, I had to chip in like everybody else and try to find me a seat. They would go right on. That was the most remarkable class I've ever had. And at the last session, I had them to meet at my house. And they knew the project they were to do. They were to share this last paper they had written, and plus talk about what the learning experience had meant to them. I got in a few words, but I didn't get to say very much. They just took it, took the ball and ran with it. And this, one of the guys in the class had me to tutor him to take some kind of exam. And he said, I will never forget that experience in that class. He said, I've never been in a class where you had to use everything you had, and the teacher didn't stand over you all the time and demand this of you. An atmosphere was just, a learning atmosphere was just created. It was a delightful experience. It really was.
What were some of the classes you taught at Cameron?
Freshman composition. Everybody on the faculty has to teach freshman composition. When you go to graduate school, you leave teaching freshman composition. When you come back, it meets you. Don't think just because you get a PhD, you're not going to have to teach freshman composition. And I think that's the reason I retired. I got up one morning to go to school. I said, I just don't think I can do this another year. I just don't. I had shared an article with them about an English teacher at one of the major universities. Just drove his car off in the lake one day it's the teaching load in freshman composition makes it one of the most dreaded experiences you'll have. You have too many students, and there's a certain basic requirement that you lay out for them, and you have to do this whether or not. And I know Mary Allen had one class with 36 students in it. See, and they're required to write 7 papers, and you have to correct every little error and discuss that with the student in order for him to make progress to the next step. And it wears you completely out. And this article that I have it in among my souvenirs said, this paper tornado begins in September. You get a brief respite and starts again in January. 'Cause you don't get off for Christmas, then let you toddle around for a while and right back into it and all that. And you know, we had different things that we carried our papers home in because we were ashamed to let the other disciplines know just how much paperwork we had to do. And they talk about doing it you can't do it on campus because you have to keep an open door for the students. You want to talk to the students. They come in and, pass the time of day. And in order to grade composition, you have to have your mind directly on what you're doing, and you can't put any interruptions because you'll forget. I'll tell you. But the second semester is not quite as bad as the first if you're lucky enough to get English 2. But there's still some that come in. You have to run those English 101 class, 1113, 1123. It's a trip.
Did you have to teach any literature classes?
Oh, yes. See, the second semester is intro to lit. Mm-hmm. And then when it became a 4-year school, I got to teach Shakespeare. I got to teach the Victorian age. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, they send you, and they're very democratic about it at Cameron. They send around a list of what's to be taught and let you put your preferences on there.
Oh, wow.
And you can't beat that. Oh, it was a liberating experience to go to Cameron. You felt like you were among friends.
One more question, and then I promise I'll get back to the list. I read somewhere about the pageant. Tell me about the pageant.
Well, they organized a club for black students called the Ebony Society. And I was co-sponsor of the Ebony Society. And we had a student named Leon Yates. He came up with the idea that we needed to have a Miss Black CU. That's when the lines were clearly drawn. Well, I came up with the idea that, the boys have football and basketball, but black girls don't have anything out here to showcase their talents and create their interest. So why don't we just have a pageant for the black girls? And we were faced with the dilemma of, first of all, you wouldn't believe this, it was difficult to get black girls interested in it. They had gone out there, I guess, so long with, Cameron is a unique experience because most of the students live off campus. And they don't have that same interaction that they have there to participate in this and that, and therefore they go home to their jobs and they, just another. So I decided to try it. And the first pageant we had 13 girls. And I told them, I said, now, I've got to think of a way to get these people out of the community involved. So knowing that there were all of these organizations in the black community, I appealed to them to sponsor a girl. Well, that means they had an interest in somebody up on that stage, and that means that all the members of that group were going to probably be there. And that's how we got the first crowd. I have a picture of it. They're just banked along the wall the first night. And off camera, we filled that over there up for the first time, completely full. And so it caught on. But you still had a problem getting the girls. I don't know why they were so apathetic about it. But it's been, let's see, we had our first pageant in 1980, and they had one this year, and they sent me the pictures out of the paper and all that. And there's a feeling of accomplishment among the girls. Well, I'm Miss Black CU. I was Miss Black CU in 1976 or whatever, you know. And the talent that came to our attention during those, we didn't know those girls had that kind of talent. And you know, some of the most exciting talent came from St. Kitts and St. Lucia. And the girls were so pleasant to work with that they send over here. I have found foreign students to be the source of so much pleasure. They are, well, they're housebroken, they say. And their lives are not. And I can truthfully say this, I have never taught a dumb Indian. I have never taught a dumb African. And the ones that come, they come from all over the world, and you'd be surprised at the difference in attitudes, in learning attitudes, and in behavioral, mannerisms and all of that you have. And I think one of the most delightful stories that come out of this was I had this student out there, and he was from Japan. And he had this Japanese name. And somehow I just took a liking to this child, and I found out that he was walking from Fort Sill to Cameron.
How long of a distance is that?
I would say about 6 miles from where she lived. And so I arranged with the multicultural person to find him a ride. And I couldn't call on him in class because I didn't know how to pronounce his name. So I told him one day, I said, come back down here with me and teach me how to pronounce your name. So we went to my office, and we worked on that name. So finally, I think I got it pretty good. I said, now you'll know what that is when I call you. Yes. When he got to the door and he called me, he turned around and told me, he said, but you can call me Tony in perfect English. And we've been working about an hour. He never said anything in class. I never called him because I didn't know how to pronounce his name. But you can call me Tony. And I remember his grandmother got sick, and he had to leave before the semester was up. He sent me a Christmas card. And 2 things they said he wanted to do was to see Texas and get a cowboy shirt. And some of the people in his immediate environment out there brought him to Texas. And while they were in Texas, they found him a cowboy shirt. So he went back home happy. He was, as I said, a delightful, delightful child. I'll never forget him. But you can call me Tony.
That's awesome.
And most of the books that I had when I retired, I gave to an African student who was he had really had no business in undergraduate school. His development was far too mature, and his response to, the education was far too mature for. But that's what America required of him. So he carried a load of them, and he told me how much they would be appreciated back in his home. Well, I didn't think I'd done anything special. I just thought I could just do so little. I could just do so little for people who had that spark of the desire to learn. When you see that, you cherish it. Oh, it becomes the most precious thing in all the world when you can find a child who really desires to learn. Because so many of us, we are here because mother and daddy sent us. And they sit there. There's a certain look when you walk in your first freshman class, and you know that just about how far you're going to get with them. And the surprising thing and the happy thing when I came to Cameron, no discipline problems. You didn't have to tell anybody to sit down or to hush or to do this or to do that. And, because when I first went to class, I didn't think there was anybody in there. When I approached the room and it was so quiet, and I looked in there and they were all sitting there. I said, this is heaven. I get to teach a class, and I don't have to stop and do something to somebody to make them behave. It was delightful. It was.
Do you find that your students inspired you through the years?
Well,
sometimes.
Yeah. But I tell you another thing. I never taught the same subject the same way 2 times in a row. And some of the suggested ways that I came up with went so well in some of those classes that I was just overwhelmed. But I had to teach one essay on the Peter Principle. Have you ever heard of the Peter Principle? The Peter Principle holds that in a hierarchy, you will get promoted. You'll be prepared here, but you'll get promoted till you reach a level of incompetence. And it's true. It's just about true. And so I took discussion questions and gave each student a paper, and you looked on there to see what group you were in. I divided them into 5 groups. And I put five levels of discussion on there, and you looked on yours to see which level you were to discuss about this level of incompetence. And in one group, we had 4 men and an Indian lady, and that turned out to be the most hilarious group of all. When they came back, they were to give their reactions to the question. Find your leader, and then let that person, summarize all of the discussion and tell how they voted on each one of these 5 topics. And it said this and that and therefore. We voted 4-1. Well, that and this and therefore. 4-1. But I said, who is that? Well, that's me. I don't agree with any of them on anything they have said. But they learned. You see that there was a potential to learn. Let them come to a discovery to a level of understanding on their own. Don't spoon feed children. That's the worst thing you can do to them. And another thing I try to stress to them is that you live in a democratic society. You're entitled to your own opinion. That opinion must be based on reason. If you have an opinion that you cannot substantiate, you are not entitled to it. But the best set of essays that I ever got from one student, I still have them. I treasure them. And you say to yourself, well, Kathy, what was Kathy's last name? She was a whiz, but she wasn't the best student I ever taught. She was just the most creative, the most ingenious. And you come across all kinds. And you remember the very, very good. And conversely, you remember, what are you doing out here in the parking lot? Oh, I knew it was something. I was supposed to go to class. I knew it was something I was supposed to be doing. With a big feather, a big blue feather that went up and turned over in his head.
Well, tell me about, we've talked about this a little bit, today. Tell me about any stumbling blocks or adversity that you faced along the way in your line of work.
Well, I don't think I should get off into that anymore because it has to do with segregation,
Okay.
working in a segregated atmosphere, and the fact that my father and mother were divorced, and that the fact that my husband passed away in the middle of my doctorate. Those are the stumbling blocks, major stumbling blocks. But, see, I cannot forget having to pass a high school to go to high school because I was black, and that's the unpleasant side of it. And let sleeping dogs lie. It's not that way anymore, so let's move on.
All right. Can you go into detail about a key moment in your career that you consider one of your biggest highlights?
Being recognized for achievement, being able to stick it out, being able to compete in the white world. Every day was a challenge the first 2-3 years that I was moved out of my comfort zone into this. And then finally, adjustment was made. And I learned not to nurse grudges, you know, and somebody asked me one time, didn't I hate? After, you know, I said, I can't afford the luxury of hate. I don't have time to hate people. And furthermore, here is John Doe over here. He's white. He's not the one that denied me the opportunity to go here. So why should I punish him for something that somebody who's dead and gone on that? So, you know, don't hang on to that. You know, this, and don't blame the situation for everything. That was one of the mistakes that we started out making.
When you were notified that you were going to be inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame,
You know, the first thought that came to my mind,
well, that's what I'd like to know.
I wish my mother were here. I would like her to know that I made it, and that all that she put into me, that I was aware of it, and that I built on the foundation that she laid. I would like my husband to know that I completed that PhD, because to begin with, he was the only one who knew what my dissertation was about. And somebody would say to me, "Val, what are you writing about?" He'd quit whatever he was doing. He knew. Now, you do this and so and so, and he'd draw it out for them, you know. I'd like for him to know that this is what it turned out to be. And I'd also like for him to know that after he went away, that I was able to hold the family together, and that, well, I felt it was my responsibility to pass on the Wynn name and whatever it meant to the children. My husband's father was one of these kind of people who believed in passing on the name. And that's why he was so delighted when Phil Jr. came along. The Wynn name will not die, he said. And see, we haven't had many generations to establish a name and all that name went for. But Daddy knew, and my husband knew, and Phil Jr. knows it, that we wanted them to feel like to be a Wynn was to be something kind of special. It made you work a little harder. It made you dream bigger dreams, so that those who came on that, and that's why I'm so pleased over this experience, so that my kids will know that, well, a teacher teaches for eternity, and what little bit we can achieve in our lifetime will be passed on to other in this line that came before it. We both came from large families, and our families have just dwindled down to nothing. Just here and there you'll find a person. But as long as my son is in this world, as long as my grandson is in this world, I'll know that there is pride in being who you are. And I wish my husband's father could know that too, because he said wins only come two ways, bigger and better. That was his philosophy of life. And I would certainly, but I certainly have the feeling they know that all was not lost. And I certainly have the feeling that what I did manage to achieve, I didn't do it by myself. So.
Do you remember the ceremony back in '96 when you were inducted? Do you remember who was there from your family?
In the Hall of Fame?
Uh-huh.
Rasan flew down for it. That's my grandson that's in Iraq. And we had a table. We had, most of the people at the table were from Lawton. They drove up for it. And the reason I remember it so well, Rasan flew and forgot his shoes. He didn't bring any shoes to wear to the and I'm trying to think if somebody found a pair of shoes that he could wear to the ceremony, but it was kind of interesting. And I remember this lady, we were supposed to, our responses to, being presented was supposed to be 2 minutes. And I left because we had to come back to Lawton that night. And this lady was still going on and on and on. But out of all this, I remember that this lady was in her late 80s, and she was still taking piano lessons. Now, that meant a great deal to me. And that spark never dies. As well as she played, I think she was a concert pianist. She always believed there was more that she could learn. She could enhance her skills more and more. Doesn't that give you an optimistic feeling about life?
Makes you feel pretty good.
Yeah.
That you can always do something.
Right. And more of something, and that there's always more to learn.
Well, you've touched many, many students over the years. Many students. How do you feel that now people look to you as a role model?
Well, it's what I've always hoped for. That perhaps I've cut a path through the wilderness and others can follow. And I hope that I have created within some students a desire to be just more than a student, but to be a scholar, and to be a Douglas graduate means something special.
Can you tell me a little something about the people you'd like to thank that have helped play an important role in your life?
I think I've touched on the most of them, beginning with Reba Cheney. But now, one of my main sources of pride and accomplishment, my son. We live vicariously through our children. And he never lets me forget for a single moment that I have inspired him to learn. He never forgets. I remember he introduced me at Durham Tech one time as, he said, I am but a clone. This is the real Wynn over here. And I enjoyed that. All the rest of the day, I had a thrilling experience today. My son made me feel, my children tell me that I suffer from an inferiority complex because I am still climbing. I am that way about my religion. And you say, well, you're a Christian. I said, I think I'm a work in progress. And I can't stop anywhere and rest on my laurels. There's more to do, more to do. We had an after-school program at our church for at-risk children. And there was this little girl in there that taught me first grade child, first time I'd ever taught first grade children. And she was working on a little project, and she brought it up to the desk and asked me what should she do now, and I explained it to her and this and that, and therefore she went on back to the seat and she worked on it. Finally she came back, she said, I have finished. I said, oh, how nice. She said, I said, we'll put us, I kept those little achievement stickers, those little funny things. Let's put us, oh, she said, no. I said, why not? She said, because you helped me. When I have one that I have done all by myself, then I put a sticker on it. Don't ever pass up the opportunity for learning. Because every time I think about any achievement, I think about that sticker, you know. Did I do it all by myself? But I tell you another thing I believe in life. Don't ever forget the Almighty and the parts the Almighty plays in our lives. Because I was no more thinking about coming to Louisville. Louisville? Where is Louisville? Who ever heard of Louisville? And I was flying down the road one night going to Bible study. We had prayer meeting and Bible study. And a thought just hit me, just like a bolt out of the blue. Moved to Texas with Mike. I said to myself, move to Texas with Mike. Anyway, I put my house on the market, sold the first week. Everything. You know how you do some things, long-range plans, and everything falls into place? You try that again, and everything goes wrong, and nothing, and it doesn't turn out right. Well, I tell you, and the lady that bought the house and her husband, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Wynn, W-Y-N-N. And that's my youngest child's name. The one over here, Michael Wynn. So it was meant to happen.
Some things are meant to be.
Yes, sir. All a billion people on this planet.
And a Wynn bought your house.
W-Y. They said the postman almost went crazy. Couldn't get mixed up with the W-Y-N-Ns. But it was the right decision. I am happy here, and I feel like everything has worked out for the best. And I have just decided to let go and let God, so.
Well, if you could give any piece of advice to fellow Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
Let's see, I had something down here. Find a job that you love. Put your heart and soul into it. Strive constantly to do your very best. Never settle for second best, not even from yourself. Because a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And so many people just coast by doing the minimum. And that just burns me up. You owe the world more than that. I said you owe a fee for just taking up space, because that's all some of us are doing. Just taking up space. Thornton Wilder did a play called Our Town. I bet you're familiar with that somewhere now. And you remember Emily wanted to come back to life, and they granted her the privilege she could come back for one day. And she chose a day, 12th or 13th, or somewhere along there. She didn't stay all day, because she said, the people down here are not living, they're just existing. And so many of us waste this precious commodity called life just existing. and it's not fair, especially in teaching. You have to create, light a fire and try to keep it burning. So many of the people in the profession are just there, because. And I said, what a wasted opportunity.
What would be your advice to women that plan to follow in your footsteps?
That was it.
Okay.
Found it something. If you don't like what you're doing, and that's what I like, the commercials here. They encourage you. If you're doing something, you're in a dead-end job. Get out and find something that that stirs you up. So you'll be eager to go to work, because you carry that over to your working environment. A bored teacher will have a class of bored pupils. But if you keep that enthusiasm, enthusiastic comes from a word meaning fire of the gods. Stir up that fire and transmit it. See if you're getting it across so that the students want to learn. And you won't have discipline problems. You won't have. It'll just be a meaningful experience for you and the children. So.
And finally today, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
Well, I have that on here. I have learned as much as I have taught. I have learned what life is all about. Much of that came from my students. And I thank God for the opportunity that was given to me to realize my potential. When they dedicated that building to my son, I stole a few minutes there. I have it on tape and wish you could see it. I thanked North Carolina for giving him the opportunity to realize his potential. See, he has a master's, an EDD, and an MBA from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, because it doesn't matter. It's University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. You have to say all of it to get the full effect on the listener, It isn't just the same as saying OU or OSU. You don't say OSU at Stillwater or OU at Norman, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I also told him in my little 3 remarks, I wanted to thank Durham and I wanted to thank Raleigh for giving him this chance. And I said, just think, if he hadn't come to North Carolina and you hadn't opened your arms to him and received him, we wouldn't have had Peggy in the family. That's my dear, delightful daughter-in-law. And that's what I want to feel that I have lived. Provide yourself with some experience where you can feel that you're giving all that you have to give, because you're given all these possibilities. Use them. Do something about it. Don't just sit in a dead-end job and exist. I hate to think that a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And so.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to mention today that we have not touched upon?
No, I think we've just about covered it. It's been delightful, though. I have enjoyed going back into some of these experiences that, I don't think about every day. I'll look back on this and enjoy it.
Well, we do appreciate your time and helping us to preserve your story.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure.